Thank you, Lee. Hi, everybody. My name's Don. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be anywhere, but I'm really grateful to be here. Nashville is kind of like my second home, I guess. Tim's mentioned and Steve's mentioned that I got sober here. My sobriety date's April 9th of 1981. I have a home group in Louisville. That home group is the Calm Down group. And a couple other folks and I started it about 35 years ago, and I named it because it meets on Wednesday, and particularly back then by Wednesday, I really needed to calm down. And I've got a sponsor. It's Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. And the centerpiece of my life for the last 40 years has been sponsoring people in AA. I've been so blessed to be able to share my story a lot of different places with a lot of people, and that's a wonderful blessing. But that's not what feeds me. What feeds me is sitting with one alcoholic and going through those steps just exactly the way that book says do it. And congratulations, this is really a big Louisville night with Bob having the most sobriety over there. Congratulations, Bob, and to the young man with one day, please keep coming back. And I certainly want to thank the committee, everybody involved in getting me here. I feel like I kind of have a family connection with the committee this year, and happy birthday to that family connection. I was born and grew up really about 65 miles from Nashville, in Kentucky, but on the Tennessee line in Trigg County. And I was born on a tobacco farm and spent the first 16 years of my life there. And my childhood and early life wasn't a thing like I thought it was. Just absolutely no relationship to reality. My capacity for self-delusion is astounding. And if I haven't done what I need to do today, on Saturday, to maintain my spiritual condition and get my divine intervention that I have to live comfortably in this world, I'll go right back to my default position, and that will include being just as capable of self-delusion as I've ever been. If I've learned anything in the time I've been around here, I've learned that I don't get much divine intervention based on Saturday, based on what I did on Friday. It's truly a day-at-a-time thing with me. I don't get to stay sober today because of how I am. I don't get to stay sober today because I haven't had a drink in over 41 years. I get to stay sober today because of what I do today and what I don't do. But at any rate, before I got sober, I had the most interesting and romantic saga you've ever heard. It wasn't just a story, it was a saga. And it was all about how by my iron will and my sterling intellect, I had pulled myself up by the bootstraps from the depths of poverty to those staggering heights I'd reached in life. And I believe that so sincerely that I would have passed the lie detector test, and I would have us both crying before I was done telling it. And I wasn't sober a week when I realized what a load of baloney. We weren't even poor. We weren't anywhere close to poor. We were middle-class farming people, had everything we needed and most of the things we wanted. Actually, we were better off than anybody else in the community. And those staggering heights I was so sure I had reached turned out to be a whole lot more staggering than they were high. What was going on the first 12, 13 years of my life was the same thing that's still going on. My ego disorder. The big book says that selfishness and self-centeredness are the root of our troubles. And that's my ego disorder. My ego disorder is that without divine intervention, I am so obsessed with myself. I'm so obsessed with what you think of me. I'm so obsessed with how I believe I compare to other people. And I'm so obsessed with how I feel that for decades I boiled the bedrock of my sobriety, where I believe, or alcoholism, to where I believe it begins, down to that ego disorder, and intertwined with it one simple sentence. And that simple sentence is that without divine intervention, I will always wind up letting how I feel be the most important thing in the world to me. Now, without divine intervention, I can give some lip service to something being more important. And I might be able to play out a charade for just a little while. But if I haven't done the work I need to do today, I'll go back to that default position. And I'll let the way I feel be the most important thing in the world. And I'll let obsession with myself has the only effect on me that I believe self-obsession, to the extent I have it, can have on a human being. It's always created so much pain and emptiness and difference and apartness down inside me that I've never been able to stand the way I feel without either running just as hard as I can and or flailing around trying to stuff something in there, try to make me feel good enough that I can stand it. That ego disorder makes me an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And what I mean by that is I'm perfectly capable of feeling too good for something or somebody, and at the same instant knowing I'm not nearly good enough for that same thing or that same person. All my life I've known I could do anything. And at the same time I've known I couldn't really do anything. And that's been bouncing around between these ears for 78 years now. I got drunk first time when I was either 12 or 13. And my story about that is like a whole lot of our stories. I got in a lot of trouble. I puked. I blacked out. I passed out. And I woke up the next morning and the four horsemen had already found my young butt. I was way more scared than I'd ever been in my life. And I was way sicker than I'd ever been in my life. Now, there were a whole bunch of Southern Baptists around this farm, tobacco farm where I grew up. And I had always rejected everything that they had to say, even when I still believed in Santa Claus. But that moment, and that actually is not a joke, I have a memory of believing in Santa Claus and rejecting everything that preacher was saying when I was 4 years old. But I decided that morning that they were still wrong about everything else, but they were right about the booze. And a young fellow as bright as I was certainly wasn't going to volunteer to go through that nightmare again. And I meant it with all my heart. And it was kind of effective because it was nearly a week until I got drunk the second time. And the way it was going to be for the next 25 years, that was a near miracle to go nearly a week. And I got drunk that second time after the nightmare the first time. For exactly the same reason I got drunk the other thousands of times. When I'd gotten enough of that booze in me for the first time in my life, I felt good enough inside that I could stand it. I felt the way I needed to feel. See, that egomania with the inferiority complex completely robs me of peers. I mean, completely. Without something, for the last 41 years, thank God, it's been you folks who are the fellowship, the 12 steps, which are the only program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the loving higher power that you were babbling about when I got here, that fills up that emptiness and takes care of all of it and lets me be a fellow among fellows. But without divine intervention or something, because alcohol, I believe, was a really poor substitute for God in a lot of ways. Really bad substitute. But it temporarily filled up a hole in me that really is a God-shaped hole. And it wouldn't stay filled very long with alcohol, but I got just a taste of it. And for the first time in my life, you see, instead of being too good for you or too bad for you, or insanely both at the same time, I had fellows. I was a fellow among fellows. And of course, since the way I feel is the most important thing in the universe, there's no mystery about my powerlessness over alcohol and things like it. Because for the next 25 years, there literally was nothing that I was less interested in than divine intervention. So as far as I knew, the booze and in the latter years, some things like it, were the only game in town. So when I wanted to change the way I feel, it was childishly, sociopathically, and tragically simple. It didn't matter what it cost, and it didn't matter who it cost, because the way I feel is the most important thing in the universe to me. I was off and running immediately. I'm not going to give you a drunk-a-log tonight, or hope I won't. But I was off and running immediately. It doesn't matter how much we drank. It's what it does to us. But in my case, for the 25 years following my first drunk, not only alcoholism, but alcohol dominated my life. I was a great self-enabler. I was always really good at school. My parents were older. People had been telling me how precocious I was since before I could remember. And it was a different world in the 1950s in Trigg County, Kentucky. A kid who drank and acted the way I do in today's world would find his young butt in an asylum before his 14th birthday. But in the 50s in Trigg County, if you were smart enough and cute enough and had the right last name, you could get away with practically murder, and I practically did. I was drunk 2 or 3 nights a week from the time I was drunk the first time till I was 16. I was 16, a junior in high school, and I was still holding on to things that are important to kids by my fingernails, holding on to things like grades and popularity, but I could feel things crumbling and rocks and bricks falling all around me, and I knew exactly why. I knew it was my drinking. No thought of stopping drinking or moderating. It was just time to get out of Dodge. So I got on a Greyhound bus and went 200 miles up to Louisville. And kicked around for a couple of days. And I did have an older sister that lived in Louisville. But I kicked around for a couple of days, and I wound up on the doorstep of the University of Louisville, and they gave me a bunch of tests and let me in as an early admission student with an academic scholarship. And my reaction to that was to stay so drunk the first year that I lost all concept of day and night. It was just a matter of passing out and coming to. And of course I blew the scholarship. And then for the next 7.5 years, I worked full-time, drank full-time, went to school full-time, and somehow got through undergraduate and law school. And I have no idea how that happened. When I look back on that whole 8-year period, I don't have a handful of clear memories that I could sit down and tell you in detail something that happened. It's all just a swirling gray mass of alcoholic insanity. Spring in 1968, I graduated from law school, and my daughter Dana, who was my only child for 21 years. I have a wonderful 33-year-old son now. But Dana was the only chick in the house for a long time. She was born that spring. I took and passed the bar, and I quit my job. And I hung up a shingle and said, "World, here I am, self-employed criminal defense lawyer." And against all odds, it worked. And for the next 10 years, I practiced law in Louisville with a good deal of material success. Not as much as I used to think I'd had, by the way. There's a peculiarity about staying sober a while is we get a different and a better focus on the past. They tell you out here in the world that you can't change the past. Don't you believe it? We do it in here every day. And often in a very positive way. And sometimes, and like me, not a very positive way. But I've always had a knack of getting involved in some cases that had some money and time to time publicity, and that's what I'd stick in your face when you suggested something was wrong with the way I lived. And I told you the way I lived leading up to practicing law, it got worse. It got a lot worse. It got worse because I no longer had a boss. I had some money to escalate things with. Most importantly of all, alcoholism simply progresses in everybody who's ever had it, whether we're drinking or not. Alcoholism does not stand still. And during the latter part of that 10 years, I used a world of things other than booze, and I used a world of them. But don't get your singleness of purpose knickers all in a knot. Because my story is exactly like Bill and Bob's. Everything else I used was something to have an impact on my drinking. Changed the effect, increased the effect, decreased the effect, helped me try to function on hangovers. But the big tent was always the alcohol, and everything else was a sideshow. A little law firm of 10 lawyers had built up around this other guy and myself. I was holding at 10 years, almost 10 years of practice, I was holding on to that world by my fingernails, but holding on to it. I got full of scotch, vodka, and 4 outside issues. And I drove a Corvette off the Pennyroyal Parkway at over 120 on February 10th, 1978. Did horrible things to my body that I'm not going to go into, but I lost some bodily functions permanently. I was in the hospital. They flew me to Vanderbilt, or didn't fly me. They took me to Vanderbilt. So it was about an hour and a half after the wreck, probably, when they got me to Vanderbilt. And my blood alcohol was still over 0.40 in addition to all the other things I had in my system. I woke up 3 or 4 times during the emergency surgery because they were terrified to give me enough anesthesia to keep me under. It was over 3 months before I was stood upright on an electric tilt table for the first time. I did not have urinary function for over a year. I was told by the doctors that I would never walk without at least a brace on one leg and maybe both, and that we had never found a surgeon that would attempt to put my plumbing together so that I would have a urinary function. Turns out doctors were wrong. I've been sober 41 years, and I haven't owned a brace for over 42. And about a year after the wreck, the head of urology at Duke University did put my plumbing back together and restored my urinary function, but I didn't know that was going to happen. And with that prognosis, once I got out of intensive care long enough to have visitors, and remember, it was a different world back then. When I got back to Louisville, I was in Vanderbilt 6 or 7 weeks, and then I got moved by ambulance against medical advice back to Louisville, because those people at Vanderbilt didn't know who I was. But after I got back to Louisville, every single day of the months I laid in the hospital, my friends would come in and bring me booze and more dope than the doctors were giving me. And I would lie there with that prognosis and say really insane things. I would say things like, You know, guys, anybody can stop drinking when the going gets a little tough. But it takes a man to lay in there with it when the bills start coming in. And then I tell them that a man ought not be out there doing the crime if he's not prepared to do the time. And just because we'd hit a bump in the road, they weren't going to hear me whining. Give me another drink, let's go on with it. That, folks, is insanity. That is powerlessness. And when you really think about it, it's letting the way I feel and my childish desire to change it be more important than my child, more important than my profession, more important than whether I ever walked, more important than whether I ever peed, more important than whether I lived or died. Letting the way I feel be the most important thing in the universe. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I proceeded to lose everything. It wasn't on account of the wreck. The wreck was just one of the events caused by the alcoholism. What had happened, I never really did have ambition. What I had was terror. I had terror. I'd lay there in the bed and smoke 4 or 5 cigarettes and remember things from the night before that terrified me, and think about things I had to face the next day that scared me to death. And finally, just terror would propel me out of the bed. And for 25 years, half the mornings when I stuck a toothbrush in my mouth, I would throw up. And I didn't even know that was abnormal. You know, you don't discuss that at cocktail parties. Honey, did you puke when you brushed your teeth this morning? I hadn't thrown up when I brushed my teeth for 41 years. But I would try to put on the appropriate clothes and go where I was supposed to go and try to make the right noise. And the reason was, I was terrified that if I didn't, you would see what I was and what I wasn't. And that would mean I'd have to stop and look at it. And it felt like the earth would swallow me up through that emptiness in my own middle if I had to stop and look at what I really was and wasn't. Had a young lady with me when I had the wreck who was not my daughter's mother. I'm certainly not proud of any of this. I've had to make an awful lot of amends and live a lot of amends because of it. But I'm not going to fail to laugh at myself where I've been ridiculous either. At the time of the wreck, I was remarried to my daughter's mother. Remarried to her. And I'm going to make one sociological observation. Please feel free to ignore it. It's not in the big book. But over the years, I've concluded that the fact that I was remarried to the same person probably establishes my alcoholism without further authentication. I just don't believe a normie would do that. I think if they even considered jumping right back in a frying pan they just got out of, they'd tear the door off the asylum getting in to protect themselves, and we do it willy-nilly, drunk and sober, you know. Joe and Sue divorced, but they date and they probably get back together, and it works for us sometimes. It's not necessarily bad. It's just really different from ordinary folks. End of sociological observation. Obviously, I got a brand new divorce right after the wreck. Well, what had happened? For 20 years, that fear that if I didn't get up and move, you would see and I'd have to look, was just a little stronger than the phenomenon of craving, the physical need to drink the next morning. Nobody ever had to tell me that drinking in the morning would cure a hangover. I was born knowing that, in the marrow of my bones. But for 20 years, the terror was just a little bit stronger than the physical need. In fact, I didn't know there was anything abnormal about what we know now as the phenomenon of craving. I thought everybody, once they got any alcohol in their body, physically needed a drink. I just thought I was weaker than other people. I didn't know that I was bodily and mentally and spiritually and every other way different from normal people. But at any rate, the young lady had to leave me on account of my insanity during that period. In the 2.5 years before I got sober, I was in some sort of asylum. Now, I'm not trying to be cute with that word. They were mental hospitals and treatment centers. But my mama called them asylums, and Bill calls them asylums in the big book. See, when I was a kid, people didn't have emotional problems or substance abuse problems and go to the hospital. They went crazy and were put in asylums. And that was a whole lot more descriptive of what kept happening to me. And I was in there 18 times in that 2.5 years before I got sober, and my new wife had to leave me on account of my insanity, and she was staying with some girlfriends and died in an accident. I last laid eyes on Dana in January of 1980, and I didn't see her, talk to her again, have any contact for over 3 years. The guys had to kick me out of the law firm I'd founded because of the social and legal pressure my behavior brought on them. The Bar Association had to kick me out of the Bar Association for the same reason. For about a year, I lived without an address, but I did not go. We built an office building in downtown Louisville, and the IRS took my portion of that, and a couple of things like that. The mortgage companies took the homes the ex-wives were in, and it was just all gone. But I didn't sleep under the bridge. But the only reason I didn't, I could always get somebody to take me in. And it was often strangers. And in the fall of 1980, I washed up at Asylum number 17, which was right here in Music City. They let me in, they told me, Harold Gilliland's one told me. They let me in because they knew you weren't going to get paid. They let me in because Harold didn't think I would live a week if they left me on the street. And I stayed in there a little over a month. It's time for me to get kicked out. And I had no place to go, no way to get there. I had no home, I had no car, I had no clothes. My teeth were rotting out of my head. And I had a roommate there, Matt. And Matt was really young. He was 21. I was ancient. I was 36 when I was there. But his sweet folks lived in the Nashville area. And they felt sorry for me and said, Don, why don't you come stay with us a few days and let's try to figure out what to do with you. And I went and lived with them a year. And the first 6 months I didn't stay straight, but I had to get better. I had to get better before I could get straight. I didn't tell this from the podium for a long time because it doesn't sound very believable, but it's the gospel truth. I had lost the ability to use a knife and fork on food. And I'm not talking about correctly. I'm talking about effectively. And I was embarrassed to ask anybody to give me some tips on how to use a knife and fork. So after I got sober, we'd go to the meetings at the 202 Club, and then we'd go down the street to Shoney's. And I would sit there at Shoney's with the knife and fork under the table trying to mimic what my friends were doing to regain the skill of feeding myself. So I needed to get better. And I did get better in that 6 months. I went to an awful lot of AA meetings, almost all of them at 202 Club. So it's so nice to be speaking somewhere where you don't have to explain what the 202 Club is. But I went to World AA meetings. Got to where I could go 2 or 3 weeks sometimes without getting ripped. And that was a world record for me. In or out of the asylum, by the way. How I really know I got better is they only put me back in the asylum, the top floor of St. Thomas in a rubber room, one time in that entire 6-month period. And at the rate I'd been going, twice a year in the asylum looked like the picture of mental health. And late March of 81, I got on my most recent drunk. And it was another one of my pop-off vodka / Listerine drunks. And I truly have drunk buckets of both those things. And this is not a joke either. I have better memories of the Listerine than I do of that old hot, cheap vodka. I can stand to smell Listerine today, but I can't stand to smell that old hot, cheap vodka. But on this most recent drunk, I was drinking and taking everything I could get my hands on. And I had taken a good half of the places I'm calling asylums that I was in, had treatment programs that were based on the 12 steps. And I went to an awful lot of meetings when I was able, between trips to asylum. So I had a bunch of information about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I believe with all my heart that I had taken step one genuinely 2 years before I could get sober. You can do a weekend retreat on step one. In fact, I have. But it boils down to a real simple proposition. I'm in a humanly hopeless position with regard to my alcoholism. And I had no doubt that I was. But steps 2, 3, and 6, 7, 11, any mention of God was so offensive to my intellect that I chose to die rather than to open up to such tomfoolery. And in April of 81, I'm thinking about, I believe it started the last day that I drank, April 8 of 81. But I don't know, because I didn't know anything had changed until I looked in the rearview mirror weeks, months, and years later. You see, I had thought, and didn't much of me want to live, but a little part of me wanted to live. And that little part knew that the only outside chance I had of living was to get this AA thing that you have. And I believed that what I had to do to get it was somehow change my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs to be more like it looked like to me you thought, felt, or believed. And in the shape I was in, I tried as hard as I could, and I couldn't change anything. And in April of 81, a loving God I'd never acknowledged, much less asked for anything, gave me the most life-saving, valuable gift I've ever had, and that gift is still with me. And it was no change of my thoughts, feelings, or beliefs. For the first time in my life, didn't know why I was doing it, but for the very first time in my life, I began to voluntarily take directions, follow directions about how to run my life. Even though I didn't understand them, I didn't agree with them, I didn't think they would work, and I certainly did not want to do them. And that behaving better than the old crazy picture show in the back of my head is what let me get sober, and it's what lets me stay sober today. And that's my pet name for my thoughts, feelings, beliefs, is the old crazy picture show in the back of my head. See, I thought that was the end all be all, what I thought, felt, and believed. But I began to be able to realize, and realize is a wonderful word. Yeah, I thought to realize and to know were basically the same thing. They're not even related. Realize is a form of the word real. When I've realized something, that literally means it has become real inside me. There are all sorts of things I've known for 70 years that haven't been brought into reality inside me. But I began to realize that I did not have to let that crazy picture show dictate my behavior. I began to realize that in my entire life, What goes on in my head has never one time left a footprint on reality. The world doesn't give a hoot what goes through my head, and I don't think God does. The world judges me totally on what I do. So what had happened was I began to take action that I didn't want to take, that I didn't believe in, that I didn't think would work. I stumbled back to 202, and by that time, once something separated me from alcohol, it took 3 or 4 days for me to be physically able to do something like sit up in a chair. But I'm not knowing why I didn't go out and get some Listerine or Pop-Off or something to relieve my horrors. I didn't. And I stumbled back to the door of the 202. I didn't think they'd let me in. And I doubt they would today. I had passed out in the AA meetings and had to be bodily carried out. They caught me in their men's room with illegal outside issues. They had warned the people they sponsored to stay away from me, that I was a loser and I was going to die. About 2 months before I got sober, I was walking through 202, and as you folks can see, I'm a tad vertically challenged. And there was a guy who's been dead over 20 years, named Joe Wall. Joe was a great guy, and Joe was 6'5". And Joe walked up in 202 and looked way down at me and said, "Don, I'm beginning to think you really are too intelligent for this program." And I thought he was giving me a compliment. My knee-jerk reaction was, thank God they figured out who they're dealing with. But Joe went on and it saved my life. And he said, "That's a shame, Don, because we've never had anybody too dumb for this deal. And we bury you buttholes all the time." Except he didn't say buttholes. And that felt like an icy hand closing over something inside me. And I thank my loving God that icy hand's never completely gone away. You see, I can't fit my life into Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous into my life. I failed miserably at that. Tell you the truth, I don't see many people who are alcoholics of my type who can fit AA into their life. I had to fit my life into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've had to stay in the middle of it, in the absolute middle. I've had people, talk about the 12-step work I do and things like that, and how do you do that? It's because if I don't keep pedaling as hard as I can, I'll fall. I just have to keep pedaling as hard as I can, and I love it. It's a great way to be. But at any rate, you let me get take a couple of stitches. I'm a little bit off track. And I'll feel the tips of those icy fingers, and so far, right back in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. They did let me in, to my surprise, at 202, and in fact, it was Harry B. that greeted me. And some of you old-timers will remember Harry. And he said, "Yeah, come on in, Dodd. You're keeping us sober." And I went in and I said, "Will you tell me one more time what I need to do if I want to live?" Said, "Sure. Don't drink, don't take dope, and go to meetings." First 60 days, I went to over 150 meetings. Had no idea why I was doing such a fool thing. I didn't want to go to one of them. It was still obvious to me that you guys were religious fanatics. But I persisted. And before I sat down tonight, you guys will find out that in my life today, the two most important spiritual traits are persistence and courtesy in my life today. But I persisted with those meetings, and I had the same thing backwards about that without divine intervention I've had backwards about everything all my life, which is to make it all about what I think, feel, or believe. See, I thought in order for AA to work, I had to first believe it would work, which I did not believe it would for me. Second, I thought it had to feel like it was working while it was working, which it generally did not. Third, I thought I had to be able to see the causal relationship of A causing B, which I could not, cannot, and no longer give one hoot. All I needed to do was give my raggedy butt to meeting after meeting at that time and let my old sick brain and soul get dragged in there behind the raggedy butt. But there were other things going on too, because they also told me that I needed to read the big book. And I told them I'd read the big book 2 or 3 times. And they told me that they were quite aware of that. That I had been quoting it to them while I'd been dying. They explained to me that I had had enough information about AA for over 2 years to stay sober a day at a time the rest of my life without learning one single new piece of information. That what was killing me wasn't what I knew and didn't know, it was what I was doing and not doing. And the first thing I had to get straight is that the big book is not a philosophy book. There's nothing in there I can learn that in and of itself will keep me sober for a heartbeat. What that book really is a simple instruction manual for my actions. That was about the time that they explained to me that the action that is the steps, the action of the first 9 steps to bring us to a state of recovery, immediately followed by the constant action of 10, 11, and 12 to maintain that recovery, are the prescription for alcoholism. That they work on alcoholism precisely like an antibiotic works on infection. If I have an infection that will kill me if it's not treated, but will respond to antibiotics, I don't need to understand the origin and nature of my infection. And I don't need to aggravate the people around me in the medical profession whining about that. I could learn everything there is to know about the infection. And if I don't take the pills, I'm dead. I don't need to understand a single thing about how antibiotics work in the human body. I don't need to believe that that little bottle of pills can take care of all those terrible things wrong with me. And I don't need to want to take the pills. That's all irrelevant. If I take the pills as directed, I will get just fine. And they promised me if I close the door on no crazy picture show and take the action as directed and persist with it, that I'd be just fine. And the fact that I'm here instead of a pauper's grave somewhere around here for about 41 years convinces me they were on to something. Then they told me if I wanted to live, I was going to have to get on my knees every morning and every night. And I remember sitting in 202 with tears rolling down my cheek, nodding at them and thinking, that ain't going to happen. But I didn't know I had the gift. And in the latter part of April of 81, over my brain's loud veto, embarrassed even though I was by myself, I started getting down on my knees and asking and thinking something that I didn't think was there. As far as I was concerned, I was asking something that wasn't there to do something that couldn't be done. But I persisted. And I have persisted with that to this day. And I don't know any other way to stay sober. I don't sponsor in a manner that I tell people they have to do anything. But I do tell them that they don't not to ask me for any suggestions on how to stay sober without getting on your knees every day, because I don't have any experience in it. I've never been able to do that. and I'm not going to run a risk on it in the morning. But at any rate, I persisted, and the twin miracles of the second step happened. The first one was, see, if I'd had to wait until I intellectually believed, step 2, then I really thought that some mystical higher power could get me out, or would get me out of that humanly hopeless dilemma of step 1, I'd have been in the pauper's grave. When I began to behave like a person would behave, if they did believe that a power greater than themselves could restore them to sanity, I got most of the benefits of being a believer, including staying sober. And the other part of the twin miracle, it turned out that for me, faith and belief are just like everything else in my life. I've never one time thought, felt, or believed my way into right behavior. I've had to behave my way into right thinking, feeling, and believing. So as a result of persisting, I came to believe, and faith found me. And for almost 41 years now, around 41 years, the existence of a loving God at the center of the universe and inside me has been the primary fact of my life. They led me. I lived in Nashville 21 months after I got sober. Unemployed, unemployable, happier than I'd ever been in my life. I did my 4th and 5th step. You know, the book says that you must do it at once after the 3rd step. Well, I did it at once 8 months later. I was working on it in my head, don't you know? The movie rights might be considered here, you know. And I tried to tell Cherry some of that crap, and Cherry'd say, Don, it is impossible to start a 4th step without a pencil and a piece of paper and a big book open to page 64. And I'd say, Cherry, you don't understand. And he'd say, Don, it's impossible to start a 4th step. Well, I finally took the advice when he told me that, Don, will you give up on trying to take your inventory? It's absolutely nothing new. You've never found anything remotely as interesting as yourself. You've spent your entire life trying to figure out what makes you tick, what's wrong with you, and look where you wound up. Said, you come to that like a little child, and you follow it line for line, and you do precisely what that book says, and it'll work. Your inventory will emerge. So he led me through that, and I did my 5th step. Somebody had given me a Timex watch, and I had my own attic by that time. And I went back to my attic, and I followed directions exactly. I spent exactly 1 hour reviewing the first 5 steps. And I didn't think I was summa cum laude, but it looked like I passed. So I got down on my knees and said the 7th step prayer and believed with all my heart that was where, with God's help, I went to work on me to make me into what I had decided a spiritual Don would be when I did my 4th and 5th step. And I rolled that way for 9 years. And about a year and a half sober as a pure byproduct of steps 8 and 9. To my surprise, my law license got put back in order. I was so terrified to go back to Louisville that if I could have found a minimum wage job here, I'd still been in Nashville, behind the counter at the convenience store. But I couldn't find a minimum wage job. So I headed off in a borrowed car. I think Jimmy P., who's here tonight, had arranged a 10-year-old borrowed car and had everything owned in the front passenger seat. Headed back to Louisville, and I thought Louisville AA wouldn't be as good as Nashville, but I threw myself into it and persisted, and it wasn't a week before I thought it was better. The second month I was in town, February of 83. A man who later became my friend, Don Pritz, he's been dead several years, was to speak in front of 2,000 people in Louisville. And Don got snowed in, and they stuck me up there at 22 months sober. I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened. And as my judgment almost always is on events in my life, I was 180 degrees wrong. It was the beginning of the rest of my life. In the last 41 years, I have spent considerably more time on Alcoholics Anonymous than I have practicing law. And God has taken really good care of me. Wonderful things started happening. That same month, I saw Dana for the first time. 2 months later, she moved in with me, lived with me throughout her high school years. And she and I are the dearest of friends, in touch every single day. In fact, she called me when Tim and I were coming down this morning while we were in the car. I was making some money practicing law, driving big cars, speaking all over the country, sponsoring just an insane number of people, rooms full of people. But that first 9 years, relationships with the opposite sex and financial chaos almost killed me, almost beat me to death. And God, it was so embarrassing, the position I was in otherwise, and being so childish in those two areas of my life. And the character defects that were embarrassing me, making my self-centered butt uncomfortable, I would put some weight on them. I would use prayer, meetings, sponsors, outside counseling. I'd get that thing cornered, that character defect. Say, come here, God, give me just a little help and we'll get rid of this. And God never came. And I didn't know what was wrong. Something happened in May of 1990 when I was 9 years sober that caused me to completely rethink. Actually, it was more unthinking than rethinking. Step 6 and 7. I told you what I thought they were. It was where, with God's help, I went to work on me to make me into what I wanted a spiritual Don to be. First one that bodum is that book doesn't say a thing about me working on me. Talks about God removing things. And it turns out they weren't where I started working on me, they were where I gave up on working on me. And did the same thing with the other character defects I did with alcohol. Gave up on them and came back to my God on like a third step on steroids. And said, Mom, Dad, I don't know where we are or how we got here. I don't know where we're supposed to go. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to behave like a person would behave. If they had quit trying to figure out the patterns. See, I thought all my life I wanted to approach everything, every area of my life. Let me figure out the pattern so I'll know where to start stitching. But I'm 78 and haven't figured out a pattern right yet. A chimpanzee's got a better chance of mastering quantum physics than I do figuring out and understanding the patterns of my life. My job is stitching. And that's where I get the guidance from my God. My God lights my path indeed, but my God lights it with a pin light for a single step. Never ever with a floodlight so I can see 90 days down the road. It'd be so nice if God would come down and say, gee, Don, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Let me lay out the way this next 90 days is going to go for you. And give me a buzz about day 85 and I'll give you another chunk. Ain't happening. I've wasted a world of time praying on Monday for the strength to handle Tuesday. And it's a waste of time. I'll get the strength to handle Tuesday on Tuesday. But God's not raising up off it on Monday. I didn't really The next thing, big thing I missed on 6 and 7. The prayer doesn't ask God to remove all my defects of character. It asks God to remove only the ones which stand in the way of my usefulness to God and my fellows. And I don't know which ones they are. I didn't realize that when I was praying for a character defect to be gone because I wanted it gone, I might as well have been praying for a Ferrari automobile. I was praying for my own selfish ends. The book says you can easily see that doesn't work. It took me 9 years to easily see that it didn't work in that situation. So, those character defects that were so painful and embarrassing to me all those years, today are a big part of what I have to share in carrying the message. And I couldn't see any of that when I was going through it. None. I just can't figure out the pattern. So I decided I was going to behave like a person who couldn't figure out the patterns and was going to behave like a person that was going to trust God stitch by stitch by stitch. I also became aware that it's not just 6 and 7. It is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Early in the book we are told, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon the constant thought of others and how we may best help them. Third step prayer, take away my difficulties, not so I can be sober and spiritual and happy. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them will bear witness to those I would help of God's power and love and way of life. 8th and 9th step, all practical, putting our lives in order. Look on page 77. It says, yes, we are doing that, but that is not our real purpose. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and those around us. And I adopted the part of the prayer of St. Francis of seeking to love, comfort, and understand, rather than to seek to be loved, comforted, and understood. And I probably prayed that prayer an average of hundreds of times a day for the last 32 years. It has changed my human relations entirely, completely. And I've discovered that courtesy, simple courtesy, if I am unfailingly courteous, I almost never get into any human conflict with anybody. And I've discovered that there is no reason I have cross-examined hostile witnesses, and some prosecutors and folks in Louisville that would, I believe, would tell you I'm pretty good at cross-examining. But I learned to cross-examine hostile witnesses with courtesy. I've been married 32 years to my sweet Sharon, and she and I have never argued, never. I sponsor some psychologists and counselors tell me that's not healthy. I tell them they're welcome to their healthy relationships. I'm going to wallow in my illness, thank you. But part of the basis of that is we are unfailingly courteous with one another. Such a shame that so often it's easier for us to be courteous to strangers than the people we live with. And I believe every little barb, usually flying under the flag of humor, I believe every little sarcastic barb leaves a mark. And then the next one leaves a mark over that. And then it becomes a scab. And then it becomes a scar. And I have stumbled that way for the last 32 years. I prayed to love, comfort, and understand you folks a dozen times during this talk, and to lay aside whether you're loving, comfort, and understanding me, and what you think of me. You see, I found out that if any part of me is trying to get you to love, comfort, and understand me, and that includes things that just seems like it's un-American. That includes making sure you respect me. And that it sure includes making dang sure you don't step on my rights, by gosh. If any part of me is coming from there, I've found it's an absolute spiritual law that I will not be loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction. Because I'm trying to get you to fill up a God-shaped hole. If you do exactly what I started out wanting you to do, before you're done, I'll change. The only time it's possible for me to be loved, comforted, and understood to my satisfaction is when I've prayed it until I really am not concerned with me, and I'm giving you my entire interest, attention, and love. And that changes everything. That changes it all. And I've been stumbling that way for 32 years. And I don't think there's been one single day in that 32 years, if you had asked me, Don, have you done that 6 and 7 deal of yours well enough that it's going to do any good, then I would have said, I think I might have got it today. Every day I would have said, oh no. I dropped the ball in my mind 50 or 100 times. I had to persist. I had to start over. And I'm going to tell you how it's worked despite that. If in May of 1990, when I had a good life, God had said, Don, I want you to make a list of the very best you think you can have in every area of your life. The spiritual, the material, everything. Relationships, family relationships, children, everything. House I live in, car drive, motorcycles I ride, everything. And God has said, well, you've got it. Please believe me. I would have shortchanged myself in every single area of my life. When I'm willing to persistently stumble in the direction of trying to take care of my fellows and not worry about me and behave like a person that believes that God will take care of me if I take care of you, I find out that God has got things in store for me that are more beautiful than I could possibly imagine. And I'm going to close by jumping back to courtesy just for one thing. I have come to the conclusion that for me, and maybe universal, I don't know, but I know it's true for me, it is absolutely impossible to be discourteous and spiritual at the same time. They are mutually exclusive. And I stumble in the direction of trying to help my fellows and carry the message, and it works. It really does. I love you guys.